Stop being stuck.
So what is stress? We hear all the time that stress is bad. We hear people saying they're really stressed out. You've all presumably heard the arguments or the framework that stress is this horrible ancient carryover from times in which humans were pursued by animals or other human predators. And we have so many creature comforts nowadays, but we have not eliminated this stress. Almost as if it was like an organ or a system in our body that was bad for us, that we're stuck with just because of the species that we are. All the problems that we're struggling with existed forever. It's just that stress at its core is a generalized system. It wasn't designed for tigers attacking us or people attacking us. It's a system to mobilize other systems in the brain and body. That's what stress really is. It's designed to be generic. It wasn't designed for one thing. And that gives it a certain advantage in taking over the state of our brain and body, but it also gives you, all of us, an advantage in controlling it because it's based on hardwired biological mechanisms, and there are hardwired biological mechanisms, meaning cells and chemicals and pathways and tissues that exist in you right now that require no neural plasticity that allow you to put a brake on stress. So you have a system for stress and you have a system for de-stress that are baked into you. They were genetically encoded and you were born with them and you still have them now. So if you're alive and listening, you have the capacity to control your stress. It's really important to understand the underlying mechanism. Let's just distinguish between stressors, which are the things that stress us out, and stress, which is the psychological and physiological response to stressors. Let's be clear about what we already know, which is that stressors can be psychological or they can be physical. Okay? If I put you outside on a cold day without a jacket for a very long time, that is stressful. If I have you prepare for too many exams at once and you can't balance it all with your sleep schedule and your other needs for comfort and well-being like food, rest, sleep, and social connection, that is stressful. So stress, and as I mentioned before, is generic. It doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional stress. So what happens when the stress response hits? Let's talk about the immediate, or what we call the acute stress response. We could also think of this as short-term stress. So you have a collection of neurons, and those are called the sympathetic chain ganglia. You don't need to memorize that name, but it's important to know that in the middle of your body, you have a chain of neurons that when something stresses us out, either in our mind or because something enters our environment and we see something that stresses us out, if you're afraid of heights, somebody you dislike walks into the room, etc., that chain of neurons becomes activated like a bunch of dominoes falling all at once. It's very fast. When that happens, those neurons release a neuromodulator, neurochemical called acetylcholine. They release that at various sites within the body. When those neurons are activated, acetylcholine is released, but there's some other neurons for the aficionados out there. They're called the postganglionic neurons. Those ones respond to that acetylcholine, and then they release epinephrine, which is the equivalent to adrenaline. So we have this system where very fast, whenever we're stressed, the core of our body, these neurons down the middle of our body, release these chemicals, and then there's adrenaline or epinephrine released at particular organs and acts in particular ways. Epinephrine acts in two different ways. Some things like the muscles of your legs and your heart and other things that need to be active when you're stressed, they have a certain kind of receptor, which is called the beta receptor, and that beta receptor responds to epinephrine and blood vessels dilate, they get bigger, and blood rushes into our legs. The heart rate speeds up. And at the same time, that epinephrine activates other receptors on certain tissues that we don't need, the ones involved in digestion, reproduction, and things of that sort that are luxuries for when things are going well, not things to pay attention to when we're stressed. And that binds to other receptors that contract the blood vessels. There are a lot of different effects. You are activated in ways that support you moving. So that's the third thing. First of all, it's generic. Second of all, the stress response activates certain things and shuts down other features of our body. And then it's a sense of agitation that makes you want to move. And that's because fundamentally, the stress response is just this generic thing that says, do something. And movement in this case can either be the bias to move in terms of action, or it can be the bias to say something. When we are stressed, we are more likely to say something that probably we shouldn't say. We are more likely to move, and if you're trying to suppress movement, you'll feel that as a tremor. You're going to feel agitated, and that's because it was designed to move you. This is important because if you want to control stress, you need to learn how to work with that agitation. The best tools to reduce stress quickly, so-called real-time tools, are going to be tools that have a direct line to the so-called autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is a name given to the kind of general features of alertness or calmness in the body. Typically it means automatic, although we do have some control over it at certain what so-called levers or entry points. The tool that, at least to my knowledge, is the fastest and most thoroughly grounded in physiology and neuroscience for calming down in a self-directed way is what's called the physiological sigh, S-I-G-H. It turns out you're all doing this all the time, but you are doing it involuntarily. And when you stress, you tend to forget that you can also activate these systems voluntarily. Here's how it works. When you exhale, the diaphragm moves up, which makes the heart a little bit smaller. It actually gets a little more compact. Blood flows more quickly through that compact space, sort of like just a pipe getting smaller. The sinoatrial node registers that blood is going more quickly, sends a signal up to the brain, and the parasympathetic nervous system, some neurons in your brainstem, send a signal back to the heart to slow the heart down. So if you want to calm down quickly, you need to make your exhales longer and or more vigorous than your inhales. Now, the reason this is so attractive as a tool for controlling stress is that it works in real time. This doesn't involve a practice that you have to go and sit there and do anything separate from life. The physiological sigh is something that people naturally start doing when they've been crying and they're trying to recover some air or calm down, when they've been sobbing very hard, or when they are in claustrophobic environments. Most people have heard that mindfulness and meditation is good, exercise is good for us, we all need to be getting enough sleep, etc. But life happens. And so whether or not it's in line at the bank, or whether or not you're wearing a mask nowadays, or you're not, whatever the conditions may be where you're at and your needs, when you're feeling stressed, the physiological sigh done just 1 to 3 times, so it would be double inhale, exhale, maybe just 2 times, will bring down your level of stress very, very fast. Many people worry that their heart rate does not come down fast enough. You do not want your heart rate to reduce very fast. There's actually something called the vasovagal response, where people will stand up or they'll get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and then all of a sudden they'll collapse, they'll faint. That's because the heart rate was reduced too much. Be aware that if you're going to use the physiological sigh or exhale emphasized breathing to calm down, that your heart rate will take about 20 to 30 seconds to come down to baseline. And you may need to repeat the physiological sigh a few times. So that's an important note about the use of breathing to control levels of stress. The other thing is that when you decide to look to the body to control the mind, it does something else that's very powerful. When you are stressed in your mind and body, your brain and your mind becomes more available for controlling the stress response and reacting to it, which is great because the sweet spot in life is to be alert and calm. Many of the protocols that are out there from laboratories and that are on, populate the internet and wellness sites and whatnot, if it's exhale emphasized breathing, oftentimes has been used as a tool for trying to teach people to fall asleep. Physiological sigh is a little different. It's designed to be used in real time. Just think of it as just kind of in your kit of things that you can do as life happens and as you need to react to life. A note about nasal versus mouth breathing. The best way to do it would be double inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. But if you can't and you can only do that through your mouth, just do it through your mouth. If you want to do it all through your nose, do it through your nose. This brings us back to the neuroscience of this parasympathetic nervous system, this calming system that's been genetically encoded into us that we all have regardless of who our parents are, which is that the neurons that control all this stuff, the face, the eyes, etc., are all working together And that's why when we get stressed, it's hard for us to speak, or we tend to jitter and these kinds of things, just like all the neurons that cause stress in the center of the spinal cord are working together to get our body activated.